Welcome back to another Djinn diary. Today is October 31st, which means Happy Halloween to everyone. Fun facts about Halloween. Jack-o'-lanterns were originally turnips. In Ireland, people carved turnips, potatoes, and even beets as jack-o'-lanterns to ward off evil spirits. When immigrants brought the tradition to America, they found that pumpkins, a native crop, were easier to carve and more plentiful. And so without further ado, here is a treat. Story 1, Sweet Candy. As a kid, my mom saw the world as a very dangerous place. It wasn't just her, every parent seemed gripped by this belief that lurking in every dark corner or shadow was something unspeakable, waiting to snatch any child that wandered too far. We heard the rules constantly. Never take candy from strangers. Always come home before the streetlights turn on. Never go anywhere with someone you don't know, even if they say your parents sent them. Always use the buddy system. These were the 4 commandments of parents, an endless cycle of absolute rules. Never, always, never, always. We would nod and agree, but inside, we thought, so what? Strangers never offered us candy, it was too dark to see outside after dusk, and nobody ever tried to lure us with stories about our parents. As for the buddy system, we often ignored it. To us, it felt like parents were the ones making life hard, not the countless threats they warned us about, which seemed purely imaginary. I remember a neighbor telling Mom about a new child abduction fad called the altered appearance trick. A kidnapper would grab an unattended child in a public place, like a market or department store, then take them to the bathroom to change their clothes, cut, or sometimes even dye their hair, and then walk out unnoticed with the new child. I thought it sounded bullshit, even if I'd never used that word around my mother, but she bought into it, her eyes widening in terror. Who would do such a thing, she asked, and the neighbor replied, preverts. I didn't know what a prevert was, but I figured it was just below stranger on Mom's list of the worst people to avoid. The word strangers came out in a voice heavy with warning, like it was all capital letters. Halloween brought the worst parental panic. Masks were everywhere, hiding the faces of potential strangers, while kids knocked on doors asking strangers for candy. When the news reported razor blades hidden in chocolate bars, it was a nightmare. Mom dumped out my candy as soon as I got home, meticulously inspecting every piece. By the time she finished, it was bedtime, and I'd only managed to eat 2 or 3 pieces, a situation I considered ridiculous but wisely kept quiet about. Then, the summer I turned 10, kids began getting sick. It didn't happen all at once. Just one here, one there. With us all on summer vacation, the assumption was a stomach bug was going around, spreading as we shared birthday parties and swimming pools. None of my friends had it, but according to the kids, it started with vomiting, followed by fever, sweating, and finally, hallucinations. The sick kids babbled strange stories until the fever passed. Afterward, they seemed okay. Mostly. Parents didn't mention it much, but kids whispered that those who got sick were different, quieter. Some even insisted the things they saw in their fever dreams were real. Tommy Anderson, one of the first kids to get sick, begged his parents for days to believe him about a 6-headed dog that chased him home. When they kept questioning him about where he'd been, probably assuming he broke the buddy system commandment, he just went silent. Visitors later claimed he hardly spoke, just stared at his wall with a blank look. Other kids got sick, too, but after a while, it was old news. It started to feel like chicken pox, something new and unsettling at first, but then just routine. We were too busy with summer's promise to worry about some virus we hadn't caught. In mid-August, I broke the buddy system commandment myself and walked to Main Street, my pocket heavy with coins. I'd spent days collecting my mom's change from the kitchen counter, dryer top, and couch cushions, saving up for a few small splurges. I navigated the streets like a seasoned stray, cutting through alleys, whistling a tune, and letting my coins jingle in my pocket. A shortcut across a field, through a few alleyways, and I was there, the Cherry Pop Candy Shop. The Cherry Pop Candy Shop was the highlight of summer. Its cheerful storefront practically shouted, "Come in," from between the dull brick buildings. The glass door sported a hand-painted logo in fire engine red and sunshine yellow, with giant cherries replacing the OS in pop and shop. As I entered, I admired it like I always did, hearing the bells above my head ring out my arrival. Behind the counter, Stanley grinned at me.
Thought I'd be seeing you here soon,
He said warmly.
Saved some candy necklaces just for you, Wendy, my dear.
Stanley was always nice. He owned the Cherry Pop candy shop and always remembered which treats we liked most. Candy necklaces were my favorite. I'd eat each one straight off my neck until only the damp, limp string remained.
I had to save up.
I jiggled my pocket so he could hear the clinking coins.
Mom's been stingy with change this summer.
What? Don't you do chores for allowance? Mow the lawn? We got loads of rain in June. Grass is growing like crazy.
Stanley leaned on the counter, studying me. Only half listening, I stared at the candy jars, bright like glittering jewels.
Mom says that's boys' work.
I said, still deciding between Fun Dip and Pixie Sticks.
Your mom's got some odd ideas. She should put you to work. You look like you could handle it. Growing up fast, aren't you?
Stanley paused, then raised his voice slightly.
Hey, want to try something special?
The word got my attention. Special candy? I reached for Pixie Sticks, reconsidered, and put them back. If there was special candy, I'd better save my money. Stanley took a key from his pocket, unlocked a drawer, and glanced quickly at the door.
Now, if I give you a piece of this, you have to promise not to tell anyone else. It's unreleased, straight from the Mars Candy Company. If they find out I'm giving free samples, they'll have my hide.
I won't tell.
I promised immediately. His hand was still in the drawer, holding something as he looked at me, deciding if I was trustworthy.
I don't know. Wendy, I hear from the other kids you can't keep a secret. They say you're a blabbermouth.
Who says that's true? That's bull crap.
As soon as I said it, I was horrified. I'd used a curse word in front of a grown-up, nearly as bad as if I'd said it in front of Mom. I clapped a hand over my mouth, embarrassed. Stanley started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a full-on belly laugh that nearly bent him over.
Okay, Wendy, I believe you. Such conviction. I hope I never get on your bad side. You'll be a tough lady someday.
Not sure what he meant. I watched him pull the special candy out and lock the drawer. He placed it on the counter with a flourish presentation of a stage magician. The candy was a row of circular discs, pastel pinks, greens, and yellows in clear plastic, with twisted ends. It looked plain and a bit disappointing.
Those are just Smarties,
I said, feeling let down. Stanley shook his head. He carefully untwisted the wrapper, took out 4 candies, and held them out.
No, there's so much more. Try them. You'll be the first to eat them in town.
That sold me. I'd never been first at anything, so I grabbed the candies and put them in my mouth. They were extra sweet, almost painfully so, and powdery soft. Even with their extra sweetness, these were definitely just repackaged Smarties. But Stanley's eager grin told me he was excited, and I couldn't tell him the truth, so I smiled.
They're really good, Stanley. Super sweet.
His grin widened.
Good, good. Want some more?
Before I could answer, he poured more into my hand, and I ate them obediently, hoping he wouldn't give me more. I was starting to feel sick. Really good, I said, smacking my lips to shake off the sweetness.
Could I have some water?
You didn't like it? My special candy.
Stanley's grin faded in disappointment. Before I could respond, a wave of nausea hit me, and I vomited, bending down as it landed between my feet. A long silence followed.
Oh, look at the naughty girl.
Stanley murmured, almost to himself.
I'm sorry.
I heaved again, but nothing came up. My face burned with embarrassment. I hadn't been sick in public since I was 4 and caught the flu at Christmas, spending most of the holiday on my grandma's couch with a bucket.
I can't have anyone in here with that mess on the floor. Bad for business. Very bad.
Stanley left the counter, locked the front door, flipped the open sign to closed, and turned to me, hands on his hips.
Who'd buy candy with that mess here, Wendy?
I'm sorry. Could I please have some water?
Stanley sighed as though it were an unreasonable request. He took my hand and led me past the counter, and I stumbled after him, praying I wouldn't get sick again. He pushed open the door to the back, and I followed, tripping over my own feet as he pulled me inside. When I looked around the room, nothing was as it should be. I thought I was being led into an office, but it was a nearly empty, sterile space with just a few broken candy crates piled in one corner. The walls were a dull gray cement, yet they seemed to be oozing, melting slightly. Ahead was a door so small it looked like it was meant for dormice, pulsing faintly like a slow heartbeat.
I can't fit through that.
I mumbled, my tongue feeling heavy and dry.
Of course you can.
Stanley insisted, reaching for my hand again.
Come on, I'll get you that water you asked for.
As his hand reached out, I saw it morphing, an oily bundle of worms writhing together in a nauseating, wet clump. My face flushed hot, and sweat prickled on my forehead and under my arms.
Don't touch me!
I shrieked, backing away. I feared that if I touched the walls, I'd start melting also. I couldn't bear the thought of those worms wrapping around my wrist or being forced through that impossibly tiny door. Stanley stepped closer, but now his face looked elongated, twisted in unnatural ways. His eyes narrowed into sinister slits. I recoiled, certain that if he touched me, I'd shatter into 1,000 jagged pieces.
I want my mom!
I'm not sure how much of this I actually said, but that's all I could think. I want my mom. I want my mom.
Don't you want some water? Your water's in there.
Stanley pointed a wormy finger back toward the too small door. I want my mom, I thought, and then I was running, bursting through the swinging door back into the cherry pop candy shop. Stanley's voice echoed, commanding me to stop, but it sounded like a deafening waterfall, a roaring torrent crashing over rocks. He reached for me, but missed. I scrambled around the counter, heading for the front door. Stanley was right behind me with his wormy hands and thundering voice. He got close but slipped on the puddle of my vomit on the floor, losing his footing. I couldn't get out fast enough. I pounded at the door, forgetting the lock until, in a panic, I turned it and flung myself into the bright outside world. The sun seared my eyes, and my whole body pulsed with unbearable heat as I ran, sprinting aimlessly down Main Street, terrified that if Stanley touched me, I'd burst into nothingness. I don't remember much after that. People say I ran down the road screaming, begging for help, claiming I was on fire, saying that the candy shop owner was made of worms. But my escape was the key. It was the piece that connected the puzzle of all the other kids who'd gotten sick and couldn't remember where they'd been or wouldn't talk about it. Turns out I wasn't the first to try Stanley's special candy. Turns out they were just Smarties soaked in liquid LSD. At first, he'd only given a piece or two to certain kids, spreading it out over weeks. But then he lost control, upping the dose each time. By the time I walked into his shop that day, he was handing out triple what he'd started with. Mom wouldn't tell me what happened to the others who went through that door I was certain was far too small for anyone to fit through. She'd just tell me I was lucky, luckier than the rest. But every time I asked, she turned away to hide her tears. The unspoken rules of safety had failed her, and she knew it. Never take candy from strangers, but Stanley wasn't a stranger. That was the problem. He was the candy man, and he was supposed to be safe. To this day, I wonder what was really behind that door, how he got those kids through it, and what happened to them back there. And to this day, I can't eat candy. This is part 5 of the Halloween series. Be sure to check out the channel for more videos, and if you subscribe now, the spirit behind you will leave you alone. Story 1. Halloween with the neighbors. To begin, I'll admit I'm not much of a people person. When the pandemic hit North America, it turned out to be one of the best things for me. Most of my day is spent online anyway, since I work in data collection at an auditing company. Let me tell you, that hasn't exactly been fun, especially with how unpredictable this year's been. Anyway, that doesn't really relate to the issue I've been having. But I figured most people start these kinds of rants with a little background, so there it is. Bottom line, I like my peace and quiet. So, when I stepped outside in early September and noticed my neighbors already decorating their yard with inflatable Frankensteins and ghosts, I was somewhat annoyed. I will admit they've done this almost every year. They have 4 young boys, all in elementary school, who want every holiday to be a big deal. So, why should 2020 be any different? But their house sits directly next to mine, so when I walk outside, it's the first thing I see every day. And with these over-the-top decorations, I knew I'd be seeing even more of it. Each day, they added more to the house, a few plastic bats hanging here, some spiderwebs draped there. I tried to ignore it, really. I'm aware I sound like the Halloween Grinch, so naturally, I kept my feelings to myself. But things changed a few nights ago when I started hearing loud, eerie screams. It seems they installed speakers near the attic, blasting what sounded like genuine crime scene audio. Imagine hearing something like that at 3:30 in the morning, it's pretty alarming. Instinctively, I called 911 to complain. I wasn't going to stay up all night because they decided to turn their home into a haunted house. Unfortunately for me, the police informed me that unless other neighbors complained, there wasn't any violation of noise ordinances. You can't be serious. Just listen, how am I supposed to sleep? I shouted, holding the phone so they could hear. Maybe I overreacted, but I was genuinely frustrated and felt I had every right to be. The operator reminded me that 911 is for emergencies only and wished me a good night, leaving me exasperated and sleep-deprived. I went to my kitchen, grabbed a bottle of Jack, and drank enough to knock myself out on the couch, timing it between the obnoxious screams. By the next morning, I'd calmed down and decided to talk to my neighbors after breakfast. Crossing their front lawn was like a minefield, thanks to the pop-up ghosts and graves scattered around. A couple nearly gave me a heart attack as I approached the door and knocked. No one answered. I tried again, still no response. I walked around to the garage and tried there. The garage was open, and I noticed their car was missing and a large pool of fake blood stained the concrete floor. Stepping forward, I saw severed heads and zombie parts lying around, probably waiting to be added to the yard. The whole area smelled awful. Covering my nose, I knocked on the door near their laundry room, trying once more to get someone's attention. Still, nothing. With a sigh, I walked across the fake blood, pausing to find the source of the foul smell. Some trash bags lay near the garage door, soaked from the rain. Figuring that was it, I rolled my eyes and, despite not feeling too neighborly, dragged the bags to the street. Back home, I wondered if any other neighbors would care enough to complain. But most of them lived too far to hear the noise. That night, I decided to record the sound, so I could have proof for the authorities. I showered and got some equipment ready to capture it, but surprisingly, there were no screams. Just silence. I stayed up until the early morning, yes, I know how old that sounds, thinking maybe they knew I'd complained, and that's why they stopped. So, I called it a night, planning to try again the next day. The following night was the same, not a sound. In fact, I noticed none of my neighbors seemed to be going about their usual routine. My neighbors' kids, normally scrambling for the school bus each morning, were nowhere to be seen. After a week of silence, I began to worry. Initially, I thought I was just sleep-deprived, but then doubt crept in. What if the scream I heard wasn't just a sound effect? That question echoed in my mind. What if the wife had been attacked? What if there'd been a break-in? I thought about the fake blood and froze, wondering if I'd accidentally walked through an actual crime scene. The severed heads and limbs replayed in my mind, and my paranoia took over. How could I have missed the signs? I rushed out into the night, using my phone's flashlight to guide me across the dark suburban streets. Their house was eerily quiet now. Not a single light was on. I questioned my memory, had it always been this silent? The bats and pop-up graves looked worn, as if they'd been there much longer than I remembered. The garage, now spotless, gave me chills, as if someone had cleaned the entire area to cover up evidence. My imagination ran wild. Chris, the husband, might have plotted something against his wife, Janice. I imagined him lacing her food over weeks, and on that night, she finally realized what was happening. Had I seen him with another woman? Maybe. Yes, I think I had, at that coffee shop downtown. Had he been having an affair? All these thoughts raced through my mind as I stood in the garage, trying to make sense of what happened. I needed to get inside and check on Janice. What if he left evidence? I rushed back to my house, my heart pounding as I grabbed a few tools from the shed. Some were missing, but I found what I needed, a crowbar to pry my way into their home. I broke through in 2 tries and stepped into a dim, dusty laundry room. The light switch didn't work. It was clear the family wasn't paying their bills. The house felt cold, like a tomb. My footsteps echoed down the empty corridor as I called out to anyone inside, but it looked abandoned. As I took a step forward, a fake axe suddenly swung from the wall, making me jump back. It was just another Halloween prop but looked disturbingly real. Chris must have just put up Halloween decorations before going upstairs to handle Janice. The kids were in the den, playing video games when they heard her scream. I imagined them running to check on her, but then their dad panicked. He must have thought the games would drown out any noise. Or he hoped Janice wouldn't fight back. But he miscalculated, and suddenly, he had a massacre on his hands. As I climbed the stairs, I pictured how he hunted his own children in the house. They must have been terrified. I noticed scuff marks on the wall and wrinkles in the rug where they had tried to hide. Yet he was relentless, consumed by his mission. Their cries meant nothing to him now. The youngest likely went first, I thought as I reached the top. The severed heads I'd seen in the garage haunted me again as I considered how he'd killed them. It was horrifying. Upstairs, a body hung from the rafters, head dangling loosely. It looked like another prop meant to scare off visitors. I ignored it and pushed forward, desperate to confirm my suspicions. But the room was empty. Only more Halloween decor. Chris had gone to great lengths to cover his tracks. What did he do with the rest of their bodies? I thought about the trash I'd taken out and felt nauseous. He must have dismembered them and planned to dispose of them gradually. Dazed, I stood there, stunned at the extent of his betrayal. The poor kids, reduced to waste for his lust for another woman. I ran to the bathroom and vomited, shuddering. As I caught my breath over the toilet, I looked around for clues. Perhaps he'd used chemicals on Janice's body, I guessed as I smelled the faint stench of bleach. Dissolving her with acid would have been easy. But where would he get such chemicals? Then I thought of my own shed. Had he broken in and taken my tools? Was he trying to frame me? I wasn't sure why I felt paranoid, but the thought made me uneasy. What should I do? I'd already called the police. Should I report this too? But they hadn't taken my last report seriously. I felt helpless and decided I needed more evidence. I went back to the hallway and examined the corpse. My stomach sank, it was no prop. It was Chris. Frantically, I worked to cut him down, hoping he might still be alive. It seemed impossible, but I tried to resuscitate him. His skin was blue, his body stiff. It hit me then, he had killed himself after slaughtering his family. That was the only logical explanation. Some part of me thought he deserved it if my suspicions were correct. No one with a conscience could live after killing their children. I took a few photos for proof before leaving. The house felt haunted, knowing what had happened, and I didn't want to spend another second there. Back home, I pieced together what I'd seen. But Chris's lover didn't fit. Surely, she would have come looking for him. Where was she? I lay down, trying to shake the chilling thought that maybe Chris had gone after her too. The next morning, police knocked at my door. I hadn't called them, but I let them in. They came with a warrant to search my home. A neighbor had reported suspicious activity and heard screams. Anger bubbled up. Why had they taken this report seriously, but ignored mine? But inside, my stomach twisted. What if Chris had planted evidence to frame me? The officers combed the house and brought K9 units to sniff every nook and cranny. It didn't take long for them to find the trash bags. The ones I was sure that I had taken to the road. Filled with body parts. The shed was next. They found trace evidence that my fingerprints were all over tools that were used to kill the family. I began to vomit, overwhelmed. My prints were everywhere because they were my tools. I pleaded with them to check Chris's house instead, explaining everything I knew. The interrogation felt endless, and I was sure I'd go to jail for something I didn't do. I was terrified, struggling to explain.
This is just a misunderstanding. I pay my taxes. I donate to the city. These people are the ones that are sick.
I insisted. I told them how this nightmare began with the family's obsession with Halloween. My mind played tricks on me, wondering if it was a massive prank. Was it all in my head? Were these real cops? Or was I going to prison for a crime that wasn't real? Desperate, I excused myself, saying I needed the restroom, where I tried to vomit and think. I was trapped, my nerves shredded. The evidence pointed to me, and panic set in. I smashed my fist against the glass, bleeding but finally steady. Then, an idea surfaced. What if I was the killer? I hated those neighbors. Their decorations kept me up all night, every holiday. Did I confront them, argue, and kill them? No, I didn't remember that. My reflection in the mirror showed a strange, dark smile, sending chills down my spine. What was happening to me? I pounded the glass again, and the police burst in, pulling me away. The rest of the evening blurred. They gave me something to calm my nerves, and we discussed the reality of the events over the past year. They told me my neighbors had been dead for a year. And another neighbor, down the street, had grown concerned for my well-being when it seemed that I had checked on them more frequently. As though I thought they were still alive. They found no fingerprints in the body bags. Anyone could have left them there. They had been sitting in my shed, sliced up and mutilated for a year now. After the wellness check, the police wished me a good night. I stared across at my neighbor's abandoned house, now a crime scene from a year ago on Halloween, when I'd finally had enough of their screams. As I looked, their ghostly figures appeared in the yard, pointing at me. Now, I know how Halloween will go. Though I didn't plan for this nightmare, I've become a part of their celebration. Welcome back to another Djinn diary. It is spooky season, so I'll be sharing a lot of Halloween stories. This is part 4 of the Halloween series. Be sure to check out the channel for more videos, and if you subscribe now, the ghost behind you will leave you alone. Story 1. The wrong door. There's an irony in living in a small community. When people imagine it, they think of a quiet life, much more peaceful than the hustle and bustle of the city. In some ways that's true, there's less noise, and people don't rush around as much, but there's also less privacy. It's rare for someone to go even a day or two without being interrupted by a neighbor in need, the council leader planning the next community cleanup, or just kids looking for someone to annoy and ease their boredom. I live in a small community. Everyone talks, and everyone knows each other's business. Some call me a shut-in, while others say I'm someone who keeps to themselves. They say it in a light-hearted way, as though tending to your own life needs a euphemism, as if being content with your own company is something wrong and needs to be glossed over. Just yesterday, I overheard Mr. and Mrs. Martin, the local shopkeepers, talking about me behind their counter, almost oblivious to how loud they were being. They say things like such a shame or it's not really your fault, and I smile it off, knowing they mean well, even if my way of living confuses them. It creates a distance, knowing how people think of me. We exchange pleasantries, but it's only small talk, and I always cut the conversation short. I tell myself I'm eager to get home to read or take Chester, my little mongrel terrier, for a walk in the woods before dusk. The truth is, I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. I may not spend much time with people, but I'm very aware of their reactions, and I know when I've said something awkward. That's why I love Chester. He seems to understand me in his quiet way, and I never feel uncomfortable around him. After tea, we often sit together and watch the sunset behind the trees. So, while I might be a bit of a shut-in, I'm still part of the community, contributing in my own way. I live in Wodenthorpe, a village that's little more than a cluster of houses with a church, community hall, a few shops, and both a primary and secondary school. We get most of what we need from the local shops, and for anything else, we drive several miles down one of the country roads leading through the surrounding forest. There's no police station, no hospital, and only one pub. It's a sleepy village, known to no one outside a 15-mile radius. Here, most people take on some kind of public role, whether it's running the craft fair or the local guides troupe. It's expected that you'll participate in something, but not in everything. There's only one event that everyone is expected to join, Samhain, or Halloween. It's the biggest event of the year. Of course, other places celebrate Halloween too, usually by dressing as vampires or ghosts and going door to door for treats. But here, Samhain is different. Everyone dresses up, not as silly monsters, but in more traditional costumes. People either dress as animals or wear cloaks and headdresses made of flowers, leaves, and such. It's said to be a remnant of an old Celtic tradition, a way to scare off evil spirits. It's a night filled with feasting, dancing, and bonfires, and every family keeps their doors open all night to welcome friendly spirits. The part that excites everyone the most happens at the beginning, when they purge the evil from the woods. After stepping out of their houses and showing off their costumes, many of which have been in the works for weeks, the whole village gathers in the meadow behind my cottage and waits for sunset. They stand together in silence, no one speaking, a sea of foxes, deer, twigs, and flowers, all facing the forest, watching the sky as the sun begins to set behind the trees. The sun dips slowly, and just before it touches the tree-line, the silence is at its peak. Then, as one, the village rushes toward the forest, shouting together, their voices blending into a deep hum that seems to rise from the earth itself. The crowd scatters among the trees, their unified voice breaking into a chorus of hoots and calls that echo all around. This lasts for about half an hour, until twilight gives way to night. Then, they return, sweating, laughing, and joking, and head to the community hall for food and music. That is, everyone except me. I've watched it happen countless times, imagining the costume I'd create, how beautiful and elegant it would be. From what I've heard, most people don't venture too far into the forest for fear of getting lost. And they know it's really just a bit of fun, a way to welcome winter and remind each other that we're still together as the nights grow longer and colder. No one actually believes there's anything in the woods. There was a rumor that someone once got lost and was missing for days, but most admit that it's just another story to make the night feel scarier. That's why I never understood why my mother forbade me from joining in the festivities. She insisted I stay home, no matter how much I begged or how excluded I felt listening to the other kids talk about their costumes or how they were going to be the first to reach the trees, all the while knowing I couldn't join them. It was just one night a year, but I could tell that everyone felt something was off about me not being there, and that my absence didn't go unnoticed. One night before Samhain, I overheard Mother arguing with Mr. Cassie outside. I only caught bits of their conversation, but it was clear that Mr. Cassie was eager for me to join the festival.
It's good for the village,
he said, but Mother stood firm, as she always did.
I will take part. That was the agreement, and that's enough. Leave my daughter alone.
Mr. Cassie was on the council responsible for organizing the event, and throughout October, he and other members visited the village to check on everyone's preparations and attendance. Mr. and Mrs. Martin often complained about his visits in their shop. Though born in the village, they resented being part of the celebration. Yet every year, I saw them in the field, their costumes hurried and made with little effort. Mother, however, always had the best costume. I watched her prepare each year. She dressed as a guardian of the forest, with a woven wicker hat that partially hid her face and a long, intricately designed cape of dried grass, decorated with bright yellow helenium flowers she grew herself just for that night. She looked like a queen of nature to me, swirling through the house as she locked all the windows, kissed me, and left, always locking the door behind her. Ours was the only house with its door shut on those nights. As soon as she left, I would rush to the back window overlooking the meadow and watch her join the others. Jealousy churned inside me as I watched them prepare to run. When the moment came, I would shout along with them, but my voice, separate and weak, never rose above theirs, trapped within the walls of our cottage. But yesterday, I finally broke Mother's rule and joined the celebration. Mother has been gone for several years now. She continued participating in Samhain as long as she could, even after her cancer diagnosis, until it finally overcame her. She died shortly after missing her first Samhain. I stayed by her side that night while everyone else celebrated, comforting her. She made me swear that I'd never take part in the festival, that I'd always lock the house and stay inside until morning. I promised her I would, but even then, I knew I was lying. It took time to gather the courage to break that promise. Each year, I would tell myself this was the year, but as the night drew closer, I became afraid, Mother's voice echoing in my head, "Promise me you'll lock the door and stay inside until daylight. Swear it to me." Even Chester seemed puzzled, wondering why we couldn't go on our usual evening walk while everyone else was outside. I wasn't banned from the woods. I regularly walked through them with Chester, or before him, our first dog, Charlie, but this was the one night each year when I had to stay indoors. I'm not sure what finally pushed me to do it. One evening while walking with Chester, we reached the edge of the meadow just as the sun was setting. We had left later than usual, and as I was about to leave the forest, I saw shadows stretching across the grass, reaching toward the village. I stopped and watched as the dark shapes spread. It felt like witnessing the night itself grow. I stayed until it was almost completely dark, then hurried home. At that moment, I knew that this would be the year I'd join. The next day, I started on my costume. I knew I was breaking my promise, but I still wanted to honor Mother, so I gathered long grasses for a cape and willow branches for a headdress. I couldn't find helenium, but I found autumn asters, their blues and purples adding my own touch to Mother's costume. After agonizing over every detail and losing sleep to anxiety, the night finally arrived. Samhain. I watched as villagers began gathering in the meadows under the red-orange sky. Chester, knowing what was coming, sat in his usual spot near the armchair, facing the window. I dressed in my costume, and when I came downstairs, Chester was still there, casting a small, sad shadow. He didn't even look at me. I walked past him to the door, heart pounding. This was it. As I turned the handle, the door clicked, and Chester's ears perked up. He yelped in excitement, bounding toward me. His tail wagged so hard I struggled to tie his leash, but soon, we were outside, breathing in the cool evening air. I walked around the house, leaving the door wide open behind me. We joined the crowd. Though no one spoke until the sun touched the trees, I could feel their confusion. Some were excited, others stared intently at me through their masks of wolves, deer, and wooden faces. I recognized some of them, like Mr. and Mrs. Martin, the shopkeepers. It was mostly the older villagers who stared the hardest, their minds unwilling to accept my sudden appearance. A few, I swear, tried to follow me as if to turn me away. But Mr. Cassie and the other council members seemed pleased, smiling beneath their wooden half-masks. I moved quickly through the crowd, head held high, finally living the scene I had imagined for so many years. I reached the front of the line. Most adults stayed back, allowing the teenagers to take the lead, but I wanted to be among the first to enter the trees. I looked around at the other frontrunners, young, eager faces. Next to me, a boy about college age stood ready, poised like an athlete. His costume was black and white, and his mask was striped like a badger's, covering his face completely. I matched his stance, planting my feet in the soft grass. I was prepared. My nerves tingled as the light dimmed, and the silence became absolute. Even the soft rustle of costumes ceased. All eyes turned toward the forest. I inhaled deeply and smiled at Chester. He was ready too. The burning orange sun sank toward the dark trees, its lower edge sharp and clear against the cloudless sky. It dipped behind a tall hemlock tree, its tip piercing the sun like a black needle. My breath hitched, and for a moment, no one moved. Then the stillness shattered, and my legs surged forward. We ran together, feet pounding the ground, our voices rising from the quiet, building into a deafening roar. I screamed until my throat burned. The boy with the badger mask was faster than me, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was running with him, with all of them. All these years denied this feeling, and for what? In seconds, I crossed the meadow and broke into the trees, my feet snapping twigs and scattering leaves. I hooped and hollered with the others, shouting into every corner of the forest. The air was cooler here, fresher, like I had been breathing stale air my whole life and was now finally free. The others fell behind, but I didn't care. I was where I should have been all those years, and I kept running. The other voices faded until only mine remained, reduced to weak shouts between gasping breaths. I had never run so hard. Doubling over, sweat dripped from my forehead as I tried to catch my breath, exhausted but happier than ever before. I glanced around. The light from the meadow dimmed behind me. Seeing how quickly the night was falling, I turned to head back. I had done it. After years of waiting, I had joined the Samhain celebration. My steps felt light and joyful. Suddenly, my arm jerked back. Chester's leash had gone tight. He stood still, staring into the forest, his fur bristling.
Chester?
He didn't respond, just kept his gaze fixed on something behind us.
Chester, come on, it's time to go home.
He growled, low and threatening, something I had never heard from him before. The cold sweat on my skin made me feel small and foolish, like a child playing dress-up. "That's enough," I muttered, reaching for his collar, but as my fingers brushed the leather, he barked sharply, startling me. Then he bolted, ripping the leash from my hand and disappearing into the dark woods. Chasing after him, tripping over roots and getting snagged by brambles that scraped my legs. He barked wildly ahead of me. I told myself he was chasing something, but deep down, I knew better. Chester never barked. Not once in all our walks through these woods, even when animals crossed our path. This wasn't like him. The light faded fast, and I struggled to make out anything in the dense forest. Everything looked gray and blurred in the deepening shadows. I staggered downwards, following the sounds of Chester's frantic barking. The air was growing colder, and I shivered. All I heard was my own breathing. My foot hit something soft. I bent down and felt Chester's fur under my hand. My fingers shook as I fumbled for the leash. He didn't move. Something shifted in the darkness ahead. Chester trembled beneath my hands.
Hello? Is someone there?
Silence, then a scraping sound, like feet dragging across the ground. It was out of place, but I couldn't figure out why. I was about to call out when I saw the badger mask emerge from the shadows.
Oh, it's you. You scared me. Sorry about Chester. He's not usually like this. Are you heading back?
The boy stood motionless, not responding. His breathing was slow and heavy.
Okay. We're heading back now, and you should too. It's getting dark.
Open the door.
He rasped, stepping closer. His mask came into view, and I noticed something wet glistening around its mouth. It was the boy from earlier, but his mask looked different. I turned to leave, but as I stepped, I realized what had felt wrong. The ground beneath me was hard, like stone. I had never seen any kind of paved path in this forest. Reaching out, my hand brushed against a smooth, solid wall. I could still see the sky above, so I must have been in some sort of trench. I tried to retrace my steps, hands outstretched. In a few steps, I hit another wall. Had I made a wrong turn? My heart raced. There hadn't been any corners like this.
Open the door.
The voice came again, closer now, wet and guttural. I looked back. The boy was nearer, reaching toward me with a clawed paw. His eyes looked wrong, not like eyes behind a mask, but part of the mask itself. Red streaks ran from them, trailing down the white stripes of his face. Blood. Fear gripped me, and I backed away. His mask's jaws opened, revealing sharp teeth stained with blood. I screamed, bolting away, clutching his leash tight. I followed Chester blindly, darting through the twists and turns. The thing's claws scraped the ground behind me, and I heard a sobbing, animal-like growl. I stumbled, regained my balance, and then pulled Chester back as an idea hit me. My fingers fumbled along the ground until they found the cold edge of the loose stone that had tripped me. As the figure approached, I turned and shouted.
Don't come any closer!
A silhouette emerged around the corner, a dark figure barely visible against the gray wall. I swung the stone hard. The creature's screech turned into a shocked snarl before a heavy thud echoed as it collapsed into the wall. I struck again. The stone cracked in my hand, and everything went silent. I didn't wait to see if it would rise. I ran. Before long, we were back on the meadow, nearing home. The door slammed behind us, nearly making me jump out of my skin. Drenched in sweat, I glanced at my costume. It was ruined. Somewhere in the dark, I had lost my headdress, and my long cloak was torn, now nothing more than a tattered scarf. All the flowers were gone. I threw it off, slumped into my armchair, and cried until my eyes ached. I didn't know what to feel. Running with them, screaming my lungs out, had been an exhilarating release, something I had never felt before. It gave me a sense of belonging, the very feeling I had longed for all my life. And I still felt it. But something had chased me in the woods, and I didn't understand why. Was it a prank? The villagers didn't seem to want me there. Their looks said it all. I was an outsider, harmless but strange, and though I was welcome in the village, this was their Samhain, and I had intruded. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Of course, they wanted me there. Still, no one welcomed me. Tradition said we couldn't speak before sunset, but they could have shaken my hand, or given some sign they were happy to see me. And hadn't I felt someone tugging at my cloak before the sun touched the trees? They were trying to stop me. Those selfish idiots. They sent that boy to scare me off, to make sure I wouldn't return. They must have thought I'd run without putting up a fight. Well, they were wrong. I could have seriously hurt him. Humiliated and exhausted, I fell into a restless sleep. I found myself back in the stone tunnel. Something lay bleeding in front of me. The scent of copper and earth filled my nose. Cold air drifted from beyond the dying thing, and I knew something unseen was watching me. I slapped my hand over my mouth to stifle the scream. I had spoken, but the words didn't sound like they came from me, they echoed from the darkness beyond. I whimpered, and again, the sound left my throat but echoed from somewhere else. I couldn't breathe. I didn't dare make another sound. Whispering filled my mind, speaking in a language I didn't understand. Panicking, I slapped the cold stone walls. Suddenly, they closed in on me, trapping me in a tiny space. I screamed, but the sound came from outside the stone. There was no escape. Then, my hand hit something, a handle jutting from the rock. I pressed it, and the wall shifted. It was a door, my way out. Then, I heard it, a distant voice, one I hadn't heard in years. My mother's voice.
Keep the door locked. Don't go outside.
Confused, I pulled my hand back. The stone fell back into place. The darkness was all around me again. Why? I asked, struggling against panic, hearing my voice from outside myself. Silence. I waited, too afraid to ask again, but certain it had been my mother's voice. I opened my mouth and spoke.
Open the door.
I smashed my hands hard against my mouth. A voice had spoken, and it had come from my mouth, but it wasn't my voice. Tears ran down my face. I breathed in shallow, panicked gasps. On the verge of passing out, I tried to lower my hands. It happened again.
Open the door.
A deep, guttural voice, scraping out of my throat like wet gravel. I lost control. I beat against the stone walls, my hands numb from striking the unyielding surface. My screams echoed outside, as the hateful voice forced its way through my lips. Open the door, open the door, open the door. When I woke, Chester was nuzzling my cheek, softly whimpering. The curtains were still open, and the black forest loomed against the dark sky. I jumped up, yanked the curtains closed, then sprinted to the door, slamming the latch across. My hand shook as I fumbled with the key, scraping it against the lock until I finally secured it. The click of the bolt broke through my terror, and relief washed over me. The dream had felt so real. So vivid. My clothes were damp with sweat, and my legs were weak, as if I'd run a marathon. I told myself it wasn't worth it. Maybe Mom had been right all along. I was too sensitive for the festival. I decided once was enough, and next year I'd watch from the window. Comforted by the thought, I moved toward the stairs. Suddenly, the door banged, rattling on its hinges. I froze, staring at the sturdy wood and thick locks, expecting someone to break in. Chester barked beside me, a sound that scared me. He never made a noise louder than a happy rumble when being scratched. Several minutes passed, but nothing happened. I told myself I was overtired, my anxiety likely spooking Chester, and turned towards the stairs, eager for the comfort of my bed. The door banged again, 3 loud knocks, like someone was hammering against it.
Go away, please. I don't want to be part of this anymore. I'm too tired. I need to sleep.
I thought I heard a muffled reply, but couldn't make out the words. I shuffled towards the door. There was definitely someone talking. I pressed my face against the door, feeling the cool wood. I heard wind through dry leaves and someone whispering in a strange, menacing language. Whoever was knocking hadn't left. I let out a shaky breath.
Please, whoever you are, I need you to leave. You can come back in the morning if you need to talk.
More whispers. Nonsense words. I stepped back from the door.
Look, I've had enough. I'm telling you to go, and if you don't, I'll make you.
There was no response, but I hadn't heard anyone leave either. I became convinced it was just kids from the village playing a prank, the same ones who tried to scare me off earlier, ruining my night. Anger flared in my chest. They were mocking me. I unlocked the door, grabbing an umbrella to raise high as I swung it open. No one was there. I stepped outside, expecting to hear footsteps fleeing into the night, but everything was still. The moonlight cast a silver glow, revealing an empty street. I slammed the door, locked it, and leaned my forehead against it. It was time for bed.
You should open the door.
I did, but no one was there.
My eyes snapped open. I turned, and there was Chester in the middle of the room, shoulders hunched, hackles raised.
Open the door and die!
His mouth twisted horribly, a dog's snout struggling to mimic human speech, drool dripping from his white fangs. The room spun, my stomach rising to my throat. The final word dropped to a low growl, rumbling through the room. Chester's mouth stretched wide, rows of sharp, crimson-stained teeth on display. I stumbled back, my head cracking against the wall. Warm liquid trickled down my neck. My trembling fingers touched my scalp, and when I pulled them back, they were covered in blood. Beyond my hand, Chester's jaw kept growing, grotesquely long, with a whip-like tongue snaking out, searching. Searching for me. With nowhere to turn, I hurled my umbrella at the gaping mouth. The tongue lashed out, wrapping around it like a coiled spring. I screamed and charged forward, kicking wildly. The Chester thing gurgled as I struck it with all my might, my foot slamming into its side. I kicked again, and it whimpered wetly, spitting out the umbrella stand and bolting into the back room, its jaw dragging along the floor. I chased after it, slammed the door shut, and collapsed, crying. Suddenly, the front door rattled. The door knocker returned, hammering louder and louder, each hit swelling the frame. I raced toward it, but the Chester thing crashed into the wood behind me. I spun in the center of the room as the banging echoed in my head. Then, more knocking, this time at the back window. I yanked the curtains aside and screamed. The frame was packed with animal faces, pressing against every inch of the glass. For a moment, I thought it was the villagers, gawking at me, the town freak. But their eyes, like the Badger Man's, were real animal eyes, blood seeping onto their fur. The smell of blood reached me from inside. The front door began to splinter. They were coming in. I bolted upstairs and slammed my bedroom door. When I was a child, I would daydream, my imagination pulling me away from the mundane village life into strange places filled with odd animals and shadowy creatures that sang my name as they danced around me. Often, I would forget what I was doing and find myself far from where I had started, with no memory of how I got there, the forest being song still ringing in my ears. From my bed, I could see the forest through the small window. I would drift asleep watching the sky fade over the trees. Occasionally, I thought I saw a lone figure standing in the woods, their face a white blur in the twilight. The shadows of the trees seemed to stretch toward my room, fingers of night beckoning me. As darkness pulled over the grass, the figure would race toward me, impossibly fast, disappearing below the window frame. By the time I got up to look, it was always gone. One night, after Samhain, I saw the figure run and vanish. I closed my eyes to sleep, but a whisper from outside stirred me awake. Cold air washed over me, and when I opened my eyes, I was standing in the meadow, halfway to the trees, wearing nothing but my nightgown. Mother nearly fainted when I walked back through the door. She wrapped me in a blanket and gave me a warm drink, bombarding me with questions. It felt like an interrogation. I still don't know how she didn't notice me leave, given there's only one door out of the cottage, but she never explained. Whenever I asked anything about Samhain, she would just sit in silence, staring at nothing. The next day, she painted over the window. After that, I never saw the figure again. I replaced the window with clear glass the day she died. Now, I can see the forest, bathed in moonlight. Something white is glimmering among the trees. They won't leave me alone. They're in the house, whispering to me from the hallway, trying different voices to lure me out, but I won't go. I'm not foolish. I dragged the wardrobe against the door to keep them out. I've tried to call for them to leave, but my voice is gone. I can't make a sound. The noise is unbearable. They're banging on every door, every window. I wrapped the duvet around my head, but it did nothing. The noise is too loud to think. I can't stand it any longer. They won't leave me alone. There's no escape, no way for me to leave. Except for one. I could open the other door. The one from my dream. It's here, in my mind. The massive stone door looms in front of me, something pounding on the other side. My hand rests on the handle. I can't hear Mother anymore. No one can stop me. I press down, and the door glides open. A figure stands in the dark doorway, wearing a mask of white bone, with two circular eye sockets. Long fingers clutch the edges of the mask, lifting it away. It falls to the floor, revealing a face I know well. My face. They always said the child got lost in the forest. But now I understand, I wasn't lost at all. I was home. Subscribe.